documents were all translated. The courtroom was open to the public to see how very fair they were, and the charges even of the crime of aggression had been built up after the First World War, when they had been warned that in future they would be held to account. There was the Hague-Kellogg Pact, which outlawed war as an instrument of national policy. All nations had agreed to abide by that, and anyone who violated that treaty would be held to account. So these were some of the lessons that I learned. And what did I try to do in order to pass on these lessons? Well, I stayed on for a while in Germany to set up all the restitution programs, because it's not enough to merely end the war and then try the criminals. You have to think of the victims as well. And so I negotiated with the treaty with West Germany and set up the organizations as member of a team. I didn't do all this alone by myself, but it was an important team, and I was a key player in those teams. We set up the entire restitution program so that anybody who'd been in a concentration camp received some compensation. What it came down to was $1 a day for Auschwitz. It wasn't very big pay, $1 a day for Auschwitz. But there are some harms, the most serious harms, you cannot measure. How do you measure compensation for death? Is Grandpa worth more than Grandma? How do you measure for the fear that they lived with every day, not knowing whether they would be alive an hour later when some SS man came by and hit them on the head with a shovel? There are things which you cannot compensate. But I thought what we have to do is avoid war making itself. That's what we have to do. It cannot be done. It had never been done before. So I began to study that subject intensely, but I mean intensely. I've been doing it for 50 years, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week usually. And I wrote a lot of books and a lot of articles on it. And I managed to get into the United Nations, accredited as a non-governmental organization representative, and sat in on all the meetings. And what I wanted was a court, like the Nuremberg Court, to carry on what we had started there. And that was the intention of the United Nations. In their first General Assembly, they said, we are going to set up a new world in which there are going to be two things, two foundation stones. One is, both of them incorporated in the Charter. The Charter of the United Nations would lay out the general outline of how nations would come together and discuss their problems, their social problems. And the Nuremberg Tribunal would set the precedent for a new code of international crimes and an international criminal court to hold accountable those who violate that law. And the crimes were limited: genocide, crimes against humanity, aggression, the supreme international crime, illegal war making itself. So these were the things we were going to do, and the Cold War came along, and it took a long while. An impetus came when 10,000 women were raped in the former Yugoslavia, and the Security Council set up a special tribunal, International Criminal Tribunal for crimes committed in Yugoslavia. When 800,000 people were butchered in Rwanda, with the knowledge, the advanced knowledge of the so-called civilized world that it was going to happen, and we did nothing. We let it happen, to the everlasting disgrace of this whole generation. We then set up a court, International Criminal Tribunal for crimes committed in Rwanda. And those courts are functioning. But the more important institution is a permanent international criminal court to prohibit genocide and crimes against humanity and aggression itself as major war crimes. Well, I participated in all of the negotiations on that. Finally, we had such a court. And unfortunately, the government of the United States, which inspired the world with its activities at Nuremberg, which was a big campaigner for the creation of such courts, instead of war as the only way of settling disputes, the United States turned its back on it. Not only turned its back, but went to great pains and continues to go to great pains to kill that court for reasons which are absolutely non-persuasive. They are misguided in their fears that there'll be a prosecutor who is going to pick on enlisted men or servicemen in the service. I am a former veteran of every campaign in Europe. I'm not going to support a court which is going to jeopardize the safety of innocent people of any rank or any people. And I can assure you, from a thorough knowledge of this subject on which I've written many books and articles, there is no threat whatsoever to the United States or any of its service personnel by that court. That court is supported by the American Bar Association, by every former president of the American Society of International Law, by every member of the European Community, by our strongest allies, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and all the others. And this government says, we don't want the court. The law can apply to you, but it doesn't apply to us. That is not a persuasive argument. It brings us into disrepute throughout the world. And I don't know how long it will take before we finally see the light to recognize that law is better than war. Now, I know my time is up, and I would like to just summarize it a bit for you. What can you do to help? Am I optimistic? Am I pessimistic? I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm very optimistic, and I'll tell you why. When I went to law school, there was no such thing as international criminal law. No one had ever heard of genocide. I knew Raphael Lemkin, who invented the term genocide. There was no discussion about human rights. I knew René Cassin, who got the Nobel Prize for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was no such thing as environmental law. All of those, there was no such thing as an international criminal court. There was no such thing as ad hoc criminal courts either. All of those things have come into fruition during my lifetime, which is a long life, but it's only a short time, a blink in the eye of historical time. And we have changed the way people think, which is very difficult, to change the way they feel about country, about their religion, about so on. These are very ingrained habits which cannot be changed quickly, but they can be changed. I see in my lifetime not only the end of slavery, but the emancipation of women. When I went to school, there were no women in my classes, no women in my college, no women in my law school, there were no women in my high school. Today, we're lucky if we get a man in. So we see all of these changes have taken place, and I say it can be done. And what we have to do is never give up. Keep pushing that rock up the hill. I used to be 7 feet tall. This wore me down. It may be a bit tiresome at times, and of course there are times when you get discouraged. But I think we owe it to the memory of those who perished, never to give up, and never to abandon the ideals which we had when the war was over, that we could create a world where all human beings could live in peace and human dignity. Those were our dreams, those were ideals, those were the real reasons why we fought, those were the reasons why many died. So let us keep that in mind when we wish to honor the veterans and honor the Gauls. And I'm confident that if you do, particularly the young people here, you'll live to see a much better and more peaceful world. Thank you very much.